Welcome to the Felonious Scribe. We're your hosts,
Kristine Raymond
and Dawn Hosmer. Helen D. asked our question for this week in the Facebook group, Cozy Mystery Friends. You ready for this one, Kristine?
I am. Bring it on.
What is your idea of the perfect murder? And we're here to try to answer that question. So,
that's a good one.
Kristine.
Well, first and foremost, let's just put the disclaimer out there to any law enforcement that is listening, that is watching, that this is for entertainment purposes only. Research, we are authors, we do research. My idea of the perfect murder, one which I could get away with.
You didn't
one
get
that
caught?
I didn't. Yes, one that I didn't end up spending the rest of my life in prison. I don't know. There are so many interesting ways that you can dispatch a person that I think I'd want to figure out something really creative that most people wouldn't think of. Like, well, geez, I don't know. What about you, Dawn?
Well, when I first heard the question and started thinking about what my answer would be, I had to separate if we're talking about murder in real life versus murder on the page. And since we're writers, I'm going to answer it as what would be my idea of the perfect murder on the page.
Good.
Yeah. So as not to implicate myself in any. And for me, as you know, all my books have murder, whether I mean for them to or not. And so for me, the perfect murder on the page to experience as a reader is one that leaves lots of options for who could have done it. Two, there's some mystery or some intrigue about exactly how the killer committed the crime, where the killer committed the crime. Is it just a one-time thing, or have they done this before? So the more mystery you can relate or put into it regarding the murder, I think that's what makes a perfect murder on the page.
How important is motive when you are writing? Like, well, and I'll use the End of Echoes as an example, because reading through that book and trying to figure it out and figure out who and all of this, but the question that kept in my mind was why. Mm-hmm. Even once I found out the who, it was the why. And you did explain the why. I mean, you did put that out there, and it made perfect sense. But I felt as I was reading, if you hadn't have done that, I would have been kind of let down, not knowing, like reading about a murder. And I know there are people out there that just kill just because they're sociopaths and they just kill. I mean, they don't need a reason. They just, they don't like the color. Well, and I guess actually there always is a reason. It just might not make sense. They don't like the color of your shirt, so they shoot you. That's a reason. That's motive.
Right.
But I don't like books where it's not really clear why the killer took those steps, why they did that, even if it's the most obscure thing you could think about. So how important is that to you, either as a writer or a reader, to make sure that that motive is there?
For me, I have to figure out, even if I don't relay it to the reader, I have to know what the motive is, or else I can't write it. And that's part of the problem I've had with the sequel to Bits and Pieces is I had to figure out what this person's motive was. I knew what he was going to do. I knew like the after effects, but I didn't know what his primary motive was. Now I have that figured out, and it's like, okay, I can write this character. And I think even if that motive is, like you said, just they're evil, like I have to know that as the writer.
Right.
And I think to me, it's apparent when you read a book, whether the author knows the motive or not. I mean, there's books I've read where I'm just like, this makes no sense. Like, okay, this perfectly normal dude went on a killing spree, but there's no reason. Like there's no connection. So I think motive is pretty important. And I think as a reader, you can tell when someone has that sorted out.
Right.
What about you? Do you?
Motive to me is almost the hardest thing to figure out. Sometimes like the killing part's actually really easy.
Exactly.
I mean, it is. It's, you know, you write a character off, you kill them off, but and you can get creative with the how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, to figure out the why, that's where you have to dig as an author, dig a little bit deeper and really get into the psyche of your character and almost become them, which I think we become all of our characters as we write them. But you really have to feel that, like, okay, what would drive this person to do that? Is it that they just, you know, genetically are missing a few components and they just, you know, don't even think about it? To them, it's no different than us stepping on an ant.
Right.
Or is it that something happened in childhood or something happened in adulthood, a certain person triggers them, or you know, a spontaneous event? Yeah, I think it's really important to have that in there. Again, like you said, maybe not all laid out for the reader, but there enough that they can identify with it if they so choose. I guess.
And I think like even in bits and pieces where, okay, because the end of Echoes, you kind of got to know the killer through the book and got to dig a little deeper into his motive, I think. Where the end of Echoes, it's all told from Tessa's point of view. But with the killer getting inside of her head, it kind of takes you through his thought processes where you don't really know, like, okay, you don't know what his childhood was like. You don't know really a lot about him other than his obsessive thoughts that lead him to kill people. And I think, so making that clear, I think the writer has to somehow make it clear, at least an element that goes into this person and why they're doing what they're doing.
That was like in Finagle, there was a minor character who had a very small scene, but their larger scene was the fact that they were a dead body that was discovered. That was that character's shining moment. But I still had to lay out why that person died.
Right.
And the other character, and I know I'm kind of speaking in riddles, but I don't want to give anything away, but the character that killed that poor unfortunate soul, I had to you know, I had to make sure that I put in there why, or at least allude to it. I couldn't just have, okay, they're in this one scene and now all of a sudden they're dead and not address it at all.
Right. And I think, like, thinking of this question, you know, what makes up the perfect murder? I do listen to a lot of true crime podcasts. So my favorite is Crime Junkies. If you haven't heard it, gotta listen. It's wonderful. But there are some really creative ways that people have committed murder. And it's shocking I mean, because these are real life stories. And,
Yeah.
but as a writer, I mean, that gives you so many ideas. Like, I'm like, I didn't know that if you injected someone with Windex that it would kill them. Like, talk about creative, like who would have thought? And there was another group of serial killers that fed all their victims to pigs, because pigs leave nothing behind. They eat it all. So I think for me, everything I watch or listen to gets filed in my brain to use for a future case. But when I look at my newest book, Somewhere in Between. So this woman wakes up at her own funeral. She doesn't know how she died. She doesn't know if she was murdered, if she committed suicide. So I think like the key to setting up a book like that is to build enough suspense and enough intrigue where the reader is going back and forth along with the character thinking, well, I could see that she did kill herself. Or I think she got murdered and it could have been this person, or it could have been this. I mean, so the perfect murder on the page, I think, makes the reader turn their wheels trying to figure out, okay, who, how, why,
Right.
And really dive into the characters to try to figure it out. And then maybe be shocked by what they read at the end. That to me is perfect.
Well, yeah, because as a reader, I don't want to know who the killer is on page 7.
Right.
I want to try to figure it out as I go along. Unless there's a reason for the author to do the reveal because the story lays out differently.
Right.
But if I'm going to read a mystery, if I'm going to guess, I want to know, I want to try to figure out what is motivating this person to do this. And yeah, sometimes, like, well, again, in Finagled, when the dead body is found, it's pretty obvious who the killer was. But at that point, nobody knew who the killer was. So, like, you kind of knew, but you didn't know.
Right.
And that's, I love, well, even more than trying to figure out who done it, I love it when I'm right. It's like, I knew it was you. I knew it was them.
I almost appreciate not being right as much as I appreciate being right, especially if the author did a good job. Now, if I'm not right because all the clues were pointing to that person and the author just decided to out of left field pull like another person and it makes no sense, then I'm very angry. But if it makes sense and I can look back and say, oh, wow, why didn't I pick up on this little nugget the author dropped? Why didn't I pick up on this motive? Like, it makes sense now. And I think kind of to go back to what you said, where you don't want to know who the killer is on page 7, unless you find out, and then the whole book is about figuring out what their motive is, what led them to that. Which that can be an interesting read as well. Like, hey, here's the murder. He seems like a normal person, or she does. What got them to that point? I think those can be great reads as well.
To me, those are a different kind of book, though, than like a mystery or a thriller. To me, those kind of, they play out differently. Now, in both The End of Echoes and Bits and Pieces, I went back and forth a lot. I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm pretty sure, I'm almost positive it's this person. And then you would throw another twist in there and I'd be like, damn, it's not that person.
Exactly. And I think even in books that involve murder and that kind of intrigue, and this is what I did in Bits, that even figuring out who the killer was, that wasn't the big twist. Like, so I think you can have the perfect murder and build that intrigue and suspense and give that little satisfaction when the person finally says, this is the killer. Okay, we got to the good part, and let their guard down, and then nope, here's the big twist. I think that's kind of fun as a reader and a writer.
You blew my mind with that book. I mean, I think it was like 2:30 in the morning. And in fact, I even texted or messaged you right when I finished. And this is before we knew each other. I mean, I was just contacting an author who I just finished their book and absolutely loved it. You must have thought, oh my gosh, this is a crazy fan. But I was like, oh my God, this was great. And I did. As soon as I finished it, I wanted to pick it up again and reread it. And it just, which I didn't. I was too exhausted.
Exactly. I don't blame you. Well, and that makes it hard, like as a writer, I think even writing a sequel, because that one did, it was well received and people enjoyed it. And I feel like I'm not a big believer in writer's block. So I don't think it's writer's block. I think it's writer's hesitation, because how do I make this one good? Like, how do I make it as surprising? And I'm a pantser, so who knows? I need to write it to find out, and I just haven't. So we'll get there. Hopefully it'll have a perfect murder as well. You're frozen up.
I'm frozen up.
Oh, okay, now you're not. You were frozen up. Okay.
Oh, that's good.
Might have to edit that part.
Nah, we'll keep in all of that stuff too. So we're about down to the wire here. Mind if I read just a little bit of Finagle?
No, please do.
And I had it all ready, and now I can't find it. Oh, there it is. There it is. Okay. Hang on. I think maybe. Okay. And I'll just preface this by saying this is a few chapters in. So, shutting off the computer, I slipped the note into my pocket, leaving the writing case in my office for the time being. Who knew what other mysterious messages might be hidden inside? Turning off the light, plunging the room into darkness, I walked out front to collect my sleepy hound, dim lumens from the street lamp outside filtering in through the plate glass window, illuminating my way and casting shadows along the floors and walls. Headlights from a passing car briefly lit up the interior of the shop, glinting off the wind chimes that hung over the front door. If only I'd had the forethought to hang a set of chimes over the back door as well. Then, perhaps, they would have warned me about the person who jimmied the lock, crept up behind me, and wrapped his fingers around my neck, squeezing until everything went black. That
awesome.
is Finagle.
It is a very good read.
Thank you.
You're working kind of on the sequel right now, correct?
Finicky Eaters, yes. Kind of what you just said about bits and pieces. The pressure is on to deliver,
yes,
a book of the similar qualities. So, yeah, it's a challenge.
It is, and I think, just to not overlook the times we're in, I think with the whole pandemic and quarantine and worry about that, I think a lot of writers are really struggling right now with creativity and getting words on the page, because they're just trying to wrap their minds around reality. So be patient with us if you're waiting on sequels. I promise right. We'll get there, but we're doing our best.
Well, that is all for this episode of the Felonious Scribe. Join us next time as we continue our exploration into the dark and twisty side of writing. And remember, life's more interesting when you add a little mystery. If you like the show, please subscribe. All the links and stuff are down below. And thanks for joining us. Hey, we want more questions. So yeah, come on, give them to us either through the comments or message me or Dawn, or we need stuff to talk about. We have fun doing the show, and we want to keep it going.
And it can be about our books, it can be about writing, it can be about life, whatever. We're open books. And we plan next episode to have a special guest. So every once in a while, we will have special guests on the show.
Author Josie McCade of the Mason-Dixon Mystery Series will be joining us. So yes, that'll be fun.
It will. Well, thanks guys, and have a great week.
Bye.